You are in a checkout line, or a waiting room, or an elevator, or somewhere with fluorescent lighting and nowhere interesting to look. A baby is across the aisle in a stroller, or propped against a stranger's shoulder, or balanced on a hip a few feet away. You have never met this child. You share no history, no context, no mutual acquaintance. You are, from any reasonable perspective, irrelevant to each other. And yet that baby is staring at you with the kind of focused, unblinking, borderline forensic attention that most adults reserve for things they genuinely cannot figure out. You smile. Maybe you wave. The baby does not wave back. The baby does not smile. The baby just keeps staring, which makes you wonder briefly if you have something on your face. You move on, assume babies just do this and forget about it by the time you reach the parking lot. But developmental researchers studying social cognition in infancy have spent years asking a different question. Not do babies stare at strangers, but what are they actually doing when they do it? And what they found has almost nothing to do with curiosity and almost everything to do with survival architecture older than language, older than civilization, possibly older than the human species itself. The most common explanation you will hear is this. Babies stare at strangers because strangers are new. It is simple novelty preference. Babies are drawn to anything unfamiliar, bright colors, sudden sounds, new faces, the same way they are drawn to a spinning mobile or a passing dog. You are just another stimulus in a world full of things they have not cataloged yet. It is not meaningful. It is not social. It is roughly equivalent to why they stare at ceiling fans. This sounds reasonable. Novelty preference is a well-documented feature of infant cognition. Babies genuinely do spend more time looking at new things than familiar ones. The logic seems airtight. Here's the problem. If stranger staring were pure novelty preference, it should decline as babies get older and accumulate more visual experience. More faces seen should mean less staring at any individual face. More data collected should flatten the response. That is not what happens. Stranger staring does not fade with exposure. Between 6 and 12 months, it intensifies, becomes more discriminating, and in many babies, tips from passive observation into something that looks a great deal more like active wariness. Novelty preference predicts the opposite pattern. Your baby isn't staring at that stranger because they're curious. Your baby is running a security check that evolution spent millions of years designing. But here's where it gets deeper. Because when researchers started measuring what is actually happening inside the infant brain during that stare, they did not find a simple novelty circuit firing. They found something that looks considerably more like a threat assessment system running at full capacity. Researchers studying social cognition and stress response in pre-verbal infants using a methodology called the preferential looking paradigm combined with salivary cortisol sampling were able to do something that earlier researchers could not. They measured both where infants directed their gaze and what their physiological stress response was doing simultaneously at the same moment during exposure to unfamiliar faces. Cortisol is the hormone your body produces under stress. It is the same compound that rises in adults when they sense something is wrong, when they feel watched, when something in the room has not been resolved. In infants as young as 6 months, measurably elevated cortisol responses appear specifically during exposure to unfamiliar faces, not unfamiliar objects, not unfamiliar sounds. Faces. The visual system and the stress response system are linked, and the link is specific to the social domain. The infant brain is not a blank room that strangers walk into. It is a building with a security desk already staffed at the front door, not because anyone trained it to be there, but because the blueprints called for it before construction even started. By 6 months, a baby has logged roughly 1,000 hours of face time with their primary caregivers, the equivalent of watching the same person's face, every expression and micro movement for 42 full days without sleeping. The stranger walks in with 0 hours on record. The gap the system is trying to close is not trivial. Your baby isn't just looking at that stranger. Your baby is running a live threat assessment using their face as the primary data source. But here's where it gets genuinely strange, because the question researchers started asking next was not just whether babies detect strangers, but how fine-grained that detection actually is. Whether the infant brain is doing something more sophisticated than sorting the world into known and unknown. And the answer turned out to be considerably more unsettling than anyone expected. Now I need to tell you about research from Yale University's Infant Cognition Lab, where Dr. Kylie Hamlin and her colleagues ran a series of deceptively simple experiments on pre-verbal infants. The setup involved showing babies short puppet shows in which one character helped another character up a hill, while a third character actively blocked the struggling one. After watching, the babies were offered both characters to reach for. At 6 months old, before language, before explicit moral instruction, before almost any of the scaffolding we normally associate with ethical reasoning, infants showed consistent, statistically significant preferences for the helper over the hinderer. 6 months is approximately 180 days of life, a point at which most babies cannot yet sit up without support. The moral evaluation system is online before the postural control system finishes its wiring. What this means for the stranger stare is this. When your baby locks onto an unfamiliar face, the brain is not running a single binary check, known or unknown, safe or unsafe. It is running a more layered evaluation, and one of the axes being assessed is behavioral. What kind of entity is this? What does their behavior signal about their intentions? The stare is not just pattern matching, it is character assessment. Your baby isn't judging that stranger. Your baby is reading them, running an intention detection algorithm that has been in the human genome for longer than we have had words to describe it. Now I need to tell you about what happens when this system gets overwhelmed, because there is a specific experimental sequence built on decades of research by Dr. Joseph Campos at the University of California, Berkeley, that shows exactly what stranger assessment costs a baby emotionally and exactly what your role in the process actually is. And once you understand it, you will never be a passive bystander to your baby's experience of the social world again. The foundational work came from the visual cliff paradigm and its later adaptation to study social referencing, the moment when an infant faces an ambiguous situation they cannot resolve on their own and turns to their caregiver's face for the answer. In studies building on Campos's framework, including research by Source, Emday, and colleagues published in Developmental Psychology in the 1980s, researchers introduced an unfamiliar adult into a situation the baby was already uncertain about. The variable they manipulated was not the stranger's behavior. The variable was the mother's face. When the caregiver showed a calm, open expression, babies relaxed, sometimes approached. When the caregiver showed wariness or tension, even subtle tension, babies withdrew, froze, or became distressed. The stranger had not changed. Not a single behavior from the unfamiliar adult was different between conditions. The baby's entire social verdict on an unknown human being was written off the caregiver's face. This is what Campos's body of work established, and it reshapes the entire picture. The stranger's stare is not completed inside the baby's head. It is a two-person process. The baby scans the stranger, builds a preliminary read, becomes uncertain, and then turns back to you to finish the evaluation. You are not watching from the sidelines. You are a co-processor in a threat assessment circuit. You are part of the hardware. Every time you tense up when a stranger approaches, even subtly, even in a way you believe is invisible, your baby's face reading system, which is running at maximum sensitivity, detects it. Every time you stay relaxed, that registers too. The conclusions your baby draws about the social world, about whether strangers are fundamentally approachable or fundamentally suspect, are being written in real time. And they are being written partly off you. Your baby isn't waiting for you to protect them from strangers. Your baby is using your face to decide how to feel about the entire social world. And now I need to say something important. Because everything covered so far describes how this system works when it is developing typically. But there are specific patterns in how babies stare at strangers, or do not, that pediatric developmental researchers say parents should be aware of. Not to alarm you. To give you a map, because having the map is always better than not having it. Two patterns are worth knowing. The first is a baby who moves through the typical staring phase but never develops social referencing, who stares at strangers without then turning back to the caregiver's face to finish the evaluation. The stare that does not include you. The second is a baby who shows no differential response to unfamiliar adults at all by 9 to 12 months, who treats every unknown face with the same flat, undifferentiated affect as a familiar one, without any of the heightened attention or wariness that marks a maturing threat detection system. Neither of these is a diagnosis. Both are worth knowing. Developmental timelines vary, and some babies are temperamentally bold or slow to warm in ways that are entirely within the range of healthy development. But these are patterns that developmental pediatricians describe as worth raising with your child's doctor, not because something is definitively wrong, but because the brain at this stage is more changeable than it will ever be again. Stranger wariness typically emerges between 6 and 9 months, peaks somewhere around 12 to 18 months, and gradually softens through the second and third year as the social cognition system accumulates more data and its classifications become more nuanced. You've been watching your baby's face since before they could hold their head up. If the quality of their social engagement feels different from what you would expect, that is not anxiety. That is calibration. You are probably the most finely tuned instrument in existence for reading this particular child. Trust what you notice. Report what you notice. That is not being alarmist. That is paying attention. Because here is what all of it is actually building toward. The staring, the cortisol, the intention reading, the social referencing. It is larger than threat detection. It is larger than stranger danger as a concept. It is the entire foundational infrastructure of how a human being learns to exist inside a society made of other people. Every unfamiliar face a baby processes, every social verdict they reach through that long, unblinking assessment, every time they turn back to your face to complete the circuit and find it calm and open, they are placing a brick in a structure that will eventually become their understanding of what other people are, what they are capable of, whether the world of human beings is predominantly navigable or predominantly dangerous. The quality of that structure will shape every relationship they enter for the rest of their lives. The stare is not a phase to wait out, it is construction work. It is the installation of the wiring that will later carry trust. So the next time a baby you have never met locks onto you across a room and just stares, holding the gaze with that unblinking, slightly unnerving intensity, here is what is actually happening. Their threat detection architecture, older than any language you have ever spoken, is scanning your face for data points. Their moral evaluation system, operational at 6 months, is asking what kind of person you are based on nothing but the signals your face and posture are broadcasting. Their cortisol is slightly elevated. Somewhere in the room, they are tracking their caregiver's face for the final verdict. And if it comes back clear, if the numbers resolve, if your face reads as something this brain can safely file away, they will probably break into a smile so sudden and total that it seems to arrive from somewhere outside ordinary cause and effect. That smile is not random. That smile is a clearance. You passed. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time a baby stared at you like this. Tell me how old they were. Tell me whether they eventually smiled or kept you on the suspect list, because I want to know. And if you want to understand why babies cry hardest the moment they see you after you've been away, not before you leave, not while you are gone, but the exact second you walk back through the door. Not because they are angry, not because they are being dramatic, but because of something happening deep inside their attachment system that most parents completely misread. That is the next video. And once you understand what is actually going on, you will never feel guilty about coming home again.